My name is Margaret Lamont, although everyone calls me Maggie behind my back, even the children, especially when they think I can't hear them. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived in High Point for the last 47 of them, in the very house on Oak Street that Winston and I bought when he was offered a job as manager at the Tomlinson Furniture Factory. At the time, it seemed like a temporary solution, just a couple of years, and then we planned to return to Charlotte. But time passed. Children were born, we put down roots, and somehow, without noticing, High Point became home. Every morning starts the same way for me. I wake up at 6:30, although I haven't needed an alarm clock for a long time. I drink a glass of water with lemon and take my blood pressure pills. Then breakfast, oatmeal with cinnamon and a cup of tea, always from the blue porcelain cup Winston gave me for our 30th wedding anniversary. He always knew what I would like, unlike the children, who give me kitchen utensils or yet another scarf for my birthday. Today, I decided to spend the morning in the garden. May in North Carolina is the best time for petunias and lobelia, which need to be planted along the path. Gardening is one of the few pleasures I have left. Well, reading and a glass of sherry in the evening are also little indulgences that my doctor, Dr. Henderson, doesn't know about. He wouldn't approve, considering my medications. I put on an old straw hat that Winston had given me years ago and went out to the garden with a trowel and gloves. The sun was already hot, but it was pleasantly cool under the big maple tree. I started digging holes for the seedlings when the phone rang. For a moment, I wondered whether I should answer. Lately, it was mostly telemarketers or Lloyd when he needed money. But I got up anyway, dusted off my knees, and went into the house. "Hello, Lamont speaking," I said, straightening my back as usual, even though the caller couldn't see me. Winston always said that manners don't depend on whether anyone is watching you or not. "Mom? It's me, Darlene." My middle daughter's voice sounded tense, as it always did when she was about to ask for something. "Are you okay?" "Yes, everything's fine," I replied, bracing myself for the inevitable request. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, I just wanted to see how you were doing." But I could hear the insincerity in her voice. Darlene never called just to call. "Darlene, I've known you for 39 years. Spill it," she sighed. "Okay. Listen, Sage has a school trip to Washington next week. It's important for her education, all her classmates are going, but Brandon just lost his job and we're a little strapped for cash. Here it is." I made a mental note in my imaginary notebook. Darlene, May 10th, money for field trip. I had a notebook like that for each of my children. Felton had almost no entries. He was too proud to ask, or too successful to need it. Lloyd, on the other hand, had a list that took up several pages. "How much?" I asked, interrupting her explanation. $350, she said, her voice a mixture of shame and relief. "I'll pay you back next month when Brandon finds a new job." We both knew she wouldn't. Just like she didn't pay back the money for the car repairs last summer, or the dentist in January, or 1,000 other urgent needs over the years. "Okay, I'll transfer the money today," I said. "How are the kids?" "They're fine, just the usual hustle and bustle," she replied hurriedly. "Listen, I have to run. I have to pick up Madison from practice. Thanks for your help, Mom. You're a lifesaver." And she hung up without even letting me ask when they would visit me. The last time I saw my grandchildren was at Christmas, almost 5 months ago. Sometimes I feel like I exist for them only as an ATM with unlimited withdrawal privileges. I returned to the garden, but my mood was ruined. As I planted petunias, I thought about the children. About Felton, my eldest, who has built a successful career in medical equipment sales somewhere in Raleigh. He calls on Christmas and Mother's Day and always sends gifts. Expensive, impeccably wrapped, and completely impersonal. Last year, it was an electric can opener. I wonder what he thinks my life is like if he thinks I don't have the strength to open a can of tuna. About Darlene, who married Brandon Niels right out of college, had 3 children, and has been living in a constant chaos of school meetings, sports practices, and financial problems ever since. She never has time to stop by, even though she lives only 20 minutes away. But every time she needs money, she somehow finds time to call. And Lloyd, my youngest, Winston's eternal disappointment. A talented mechanic who could have owned his own shop, but instead he scrapes by with odd jobs, always getting involved in shady deals and showing up at my door only when he needs to borrow money or wait out another breakup with his girlfriend. Winston often said we spoiled our children too much. Maybe he was right. After his death 3 years ago, I was left alone in this big house, which was once filled with children's laughter and running around, and now only with the ticking of the clocks that Winston had collected all his life and my footsteps on the creaky parquet floor. By noon, I had finished with the petunias and started on the lobelias. The sun was high in the sky, and even in the shade of the maple tree, it was hot. I felt a little dizzy, but I put it down to the heat and my age. I should have taken a break and had some water, but I wanted to finish planting before lunch. Reaching for another seedling, I felt a strange sensation, as if the ground had suddenly tilted and all sounds had become muffled, as if I were wrapped in a thick blanket. The last thing I remember is the smell of damp earth and the thought that I hadn't watered the morning plantings. I woke up slowly and confused. First came the sounds, the beeping of some kind of equipment, muffled voices, the rustling of footsteps, then the smells, antiseptic, alcohol, something synthetic and unpleasant, and finally, sensations, a hard pillow under my head, cool air, a tube in my hand. I opened my eyes and saw a white ceiling with fluorescent lights. A hospital, definitely a hospital. What am I doing here? Mrs. Lamont, can you hear me? A young woman in a light blue uniform leaned over me. I'm Vanessa, your nurse. You're at High Point Regional Hospital. What happened? My voice sounded hoarse, as if I hadn't used it in days. You've had a stroke, she replied, adjusting the IV. Your neighbor, Mrs. Prescott, found you. She came over to borrow some sugar and saw you lying unconscious in the garden. It's a good thing she called an ambulance right away. Jean Prescott. I'll have to thank her when I get home. Maybe I'll bake that blueberry pie she likes so much. How long have I been here? I asked, trying to focus. 2 days, Vanessa checked the monitor. You were admitted the day before yesterday, on Wednesday. Today is Friday, May 15th. Dr. Reeves says you're lucky. The stroke wasn't too severe and you got help in time. 2 days. I lost 2 days of my life lying here unconscious, and it seems like none of my children even noticed. Do my children know I'm here? Vanessa hesitated for a moment. Yes, we contacted them as soon as you were brought in. Your eldest son, Felton, right? He called yesterday, asking about your condition. He said he'd come as soon as he could get out of Raleigh. Well, at least he called. That's something. And Darlene? Lloyd? I'm sorry, I'm not sure. She looked embarrassed. I just started my shift this morning, but I can check the visitor log. No, don't bother, I tried to smile. I'm sure they're all very busy. Vanessa nodded with an expression that clearly said she was thinking about children who hadn't visited their mother after her stroke, but she was too professional to say it out loud. Dr. Reeves will be in to see you in an hour, she said instead. In the meantime, try to get some rest. If you need anything, press the call button. I was alone in the ward, except for an elderly woman behind the screen to my left who seemed to be fast asleep, snoring quietly. Outside the window was a bright May day, just like the last one I remembered. My petunias were probably wilting without water. I wonder if any of the kids would think to stop by and check on the house. Probably not. The clock on the wall read almost 2 in the afternoon. Darlene should be home by now. She usually started cooking dinner for her brood before taking the kids to their various activities. Lloyd was probably in his workshop if he was still working there. And Felton, who knows where Felton was? Probably at some important meeting, selling expensive medical equipment to people in white coats. I reached for the nightstand where I spotted the phone, my own cell phone, an old Nokia that Felton had been trying to replace with something more modern for the past 5 years. I always refused. Why would I need a smartphone? I don't sit on Facebook or take selfies, whatever that means. I need a phone to make calls, and my old Nokia does that just fine. I dialed Darlene's number. Long beeps, then voicemail. You've reached Darlene Niels. I can't answer right now, but please leave a message and I'll get back to you. Darlene, it's Mom, I said after the beep. I'm in the hospital. I had a stroke. It's not serious. The doctors say I'll be fine. Just wanted you to know. Lloyd was next. His phone didn't even ring. It went straight to voicemail. Probably disconnected for non-payment. Or he changed his number again. With Lloyd, you can never be sure. Felton answered after the 3rd ring. Mom? His voice sounded tense. How are you? The hospital called. I'm fine, I replied, trying to sound cheerful. The doctors say I'm lucky. A minor stroke, no serious consequences. I might be discharged in a few days. Thank God. He sounded genuinely concerned. I was going to come, but we have a conference here on new equipment, and I can't miss it. It's an important contract. Of course, dear, I understand, I said automatically. I always understood. All their lives. But I'll come as soon as I can, he added hastily. Maybe Sunday or early next week. Are you there alone? Have Darlene or Lloyd visited you? Not yet, I said, trying not to sound disappointed. But I'm sure they're busy. Darlene has the kids and Lloyd has whatever Lloyd has. Yes, of course. Felton clearly didn't want to delve into the subject of his younger brother's irresponsibility. Listen, I have to run to a meeting, but I'll call you tonight, okay? Sure, honey. Good luck at the conference. I hung up and stared at the ceiling. A typical conversation with Felton, businesslike, polite, and completely empty. It was as if he were calling a client, not his own mother who had just suffered a stroke. An hour later, Dr. Reeves arrived, a young man with prematurely graying temples and kind eyes. He checked my reflexes, asked a few questions to assess my memory and speech, then sat down on the edge of the bed. Well, Mrs. Lamont, the news is good, he said with a smile. The stroke was ischemic, but mild. We started treatment in time, and it appears that no serious damage has been done. Of course, you will need rehabilitation, but I am optimistic about a full recovery. When can I go home? I asked. Hospitals always made me claustrophobic. If everything continues to go well, I think in 5 or 6 days, he replied. But you can't be alone at first. Someone close to you will need to look after you for at least the first 2 weeks. Do you have anyone who could help? I thought of my children, of Felton, who couldn't miss a conference even for his mother who had had a stroke, of Darlene, always busy with her family's problems, of Lloyd, who needed more care than a 72-year-old woman after a stroke. Yes, of course, I lied with a smile. My daughter has already offered to help. Dr. Reeves nodded, clearly satisfied with my answer. Excellent. Then get some rest and gather your strength. Tomorrow we'll start with some light exercises to help you recover. After he left, I tried calling Darlene again, but without success. I sent her a message, hoping she would at least read it. I'm in the hospital, stroke. The doctors say I'll be fine, but they're worried I can't be left alone after I'm discharged. Please call me. The rest of the day passed in a strange, semi-conscious state. I dozed, woke up, looked out the window at the gradually darkening sky, listened to the quiet conversations of the nurses in the hallway. The phone remained silent. In the evening, my roommate finally woke up and introduced herself as Edna Jenkins. She was 78, had undergone gallbladder surgery, and had 5 children, 11 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. And they all come to visit me, she said proudly. Sometimes I think there are too many of them. They're noisy, they fuss, they ask the same questions over and over, but... She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. It's better than lying here alone, isn't it? That's right, I agreed, trying not to let the envy in my voice show. By 9 o'clock that evening, I realized that none of my children were coming to visit me today, or tomorrow, or ever, perhaps. Not because they didn't love me. I believed that somewhere deep down they still loved their old mother. It was just that I had become a familiar part of the landscape, like the old oak tree in the backyard or the cuckoo clock in the living room. Something that had always been there and would probably always be there, requiring no special attention or care. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady ticking of the clock on the wall of the ward. They reminded me of Winston's collection, of the clocks he had so carefully selected and tuned every Sunday. Clocks are the heart of a home, Maggie, he used to say. As long as they tick, the house is alive. Well, my heart is still ticking, despite the stroke. And the house is probably alive too, even without me. The only question is whether anyone will notice the difference when those clocks stop forever. The second day in the hospital began with a noisy round of nurses. They checked my vitals, changed my IVs, asked how I was feeling, all with professional care that, however, was little different from polite indifference. Everyone except Vanessa. She somehow managed to put genuine concern into her actions. "How did you sleep, Mrs. Lamont?" she asked, helping me settle higher on the pillows. "Not bad for a hospital," I replied. "These walls always remind me of Winston's death. My husband spent his last days in a similar ward, only instead of a parking lot, he had a view of the brick wall of the neighboring building. I came every day, sat next to him, held his hand as he slowly succumbed to pancreatic cancer. Our children took turns visiting. Felton spent 3 days and then went back to Raleigh for urgent negotiations. Darlene ran between taking the kids to their activities, and Lloyd came on the last day, 2 hours before his father died, drunk and with his face swollen from crying. Did any of your children call?" Vanessa asked casually, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Felton called yesterday. He promised to come as soon as he was free," I said, without much hope. "Maybe over the weekend." Vanessa nodded, unable to hide her skepticism. She had clearly seen enough lonely, elderly patients whose children were too busy to visit them. "Breakfast is in 20 minutes, she said, changing the subject. "And after lunch, the physical therapist will come for your initial assessment. You'll need rehabilitation to make a full recovery." After she left, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages. Darlene hadn't responded to my text from yesterday about the hospital. Instead, I saw a notification from the bank that $350 had been withdrawn, the money for Sage's trip. It seemed like my daughter had found time to check if I had transferred the promised money, but couldn't find a minute to respond to her mother who had suffered a stroke. Edna Jenkins, my roommate, watched me with sympathy. "No luck?" she asked, nodding at the phone in my hand. "They're busy," I replied curtly. "Everyone has their own life." "My youngest has 9 children and a construction job," Edna snorted, "but he stops by every evening for at least half an hour. He says I raised him. Now it's his turn to take care of me." I said nothing, not wanting to compare our situations. "Every family is unhappy in its own way," as one of the classics said, although I doubt that the author of that phrase had children who only remembered their mother when they needed money. The day dragged on slowly. Breakfast, pills, blood pressure, a quick visit from Dr. Reeves, who was pleased with my progress, lunch, more pills. Then the physical therapist arrived, an energetic woman in her 40s with bright red hair pulled back in a ponytail. "My name is Deborah, and I'll be working with you on your recovery," she announced, helping me sit on the edge of the bed. "The stroke mainly affected the left side, right? Let's check how badly your coordination has been affected." The next hour was filled with simple but tedious exercises. Raise your arm, make a fist, turn your head, stand up, take 2 steps, sit down. Things I used to do without thinking now required concentration and effort. My left arm was less responsive than my right, and my left leg dragged a little when I walked. "You're doing great, Mrs. Lamont," Deborah encouraged me after a series of exercises. "The prognosis is very good. With regular exercise, you'll be back to your normal life in a couple of months." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what normal life I was returning to. To an empty house filled with ticking clocks? To daily calls from my children asking for money? To oatmeal for breakfast and sherry in the evening and silent conversations with a photograph of Winston? After the physical therapist left, I dozed off, exhausted from the exercises. I woke up to the sound of the door opening. For a moment, my heart leapt. Maybe one of the children had decided to visit me after all, but it was only the nurse with my afternoon medication. In the evening, I tried calling the children again. Felton didn't answer, but he sent a message. "Sorry, I'm at a conference, can't talk, how are you?" I replied that I was fine, and heard nothing more from him. Darlene answered after the 5th ring, her voice sounding breathless and irritated. "Mom, sorry, I just saw your message. Oh my God, a stroke. Are you okay?" Her voice was genuinely concerned, but somehow superficial, as if she were asking about a cold rather than a condition that could have been fatal. "The doctors say I'm lucky," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "But I won't be able to be alone for a while after I get out. Dr. Reeves said someone needs to watch me for at least 2 weeks. There was a silence on the line. "Oh, Mom," Darlene finally exhaled. "You know how hard things are for us right now. Brandon's out of work, the kids need attention all the time, the house is a mess." "I understand," I said quickly, though deep down I hoped she would offer to help. "I'm just letting you know. Maybe Felton or Lloyd can help." "Yes, maybe," she replied with obvious relief. Listen, I have to run. Madison is waiting for me to take her to dance. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Maybe I'll come over with the kids on the weekend. She hung up before I could say goodbye. I knew she wouldn't call tomorrow or come over on the weekend. In 20 years of motherhood, I had learned to recognize the lies in my children's voices. To my surprise, Lloyd called back 10 minutes after I left him a message. "Mom!" His voice sounded agitated. "What happened? What stroke?" I patiently explained the situation, emphasizing that the doctors were optimistic, but that I would need help after she was discharged. "Damn, Mom, this is serious," he said, and I almost believed his sincere concern. "I'd come if I could, but I'm in Greensboro filling in for a friend at the workshop. I can't just drop everything, you understand? But maybe I can take next week off and come visit you." "Don't worry," I replied, knowing he was looking for an excuse not to come. "I'll be fine." "Maybe you should think about a nursing home," he suggested suddenly. "They'll take good care of you there, and you won't have to be alone in that big house." There it was. Lloyd had always been the most straightforward of my children, and the most practical when it came to money. A nursing home would cost money, a lot of money from my savings. The very savings he was probably hoping to inherit. "I'll think about it," I lied, "but right now, I just want to go home." "Of course, Mom." His voice softened. "Just take care of yourself, okay? And let me know if there's anything I can do." After talking to Lloyd, I stared out the window at the darkening sky for a long time. I wonder if it's always like this. You grow old, you get sick, and suddenly you realize that all these people you raised, to whom you gave your life piece by piece, have become strangers. Or maybe they were always strangers, and I just didn't want to see it. Images flashed through my mind. Little Felton with his scraped knee, whom I comforted. Darlene in her prom dress, proud and beautiful. Lloyd fixing the radio on his own for the first time at the age of 12. When did everything change? When did caring turn into a duty and then disappear altogether? Perhaps it started when they grew up and left home, or when Winston died. Or maybe it was predestined from the beginning. I spoiled them, was always there for them, always helped them, and they just got used to taking my care for granted. The third day in the hospital began with an unexpected visit. I was just finishing breakfast when the door to the ward opened, and a thin figure with a backpack appeared in the doorway. "Grandma?" My granddaughter Sage's uncertain voice made me sit up straight in the hospital bed. "Sage!" I couldn't hide my surprise and joy. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at school?" "We have a short day," she said, coming over to the bed and hugging me awkwardly. "Teacher conference or something like that. I decided to come visit you. Mom said you had a stroke." "Nothing serious," I assured her, although the fact that a 15-year-old girl had found time to visit me and her mother hadn't said a lot. "I'm glad you came." Sage settled into a chair next to the bed, placing her backpack on the floor. She looked like a typical 15-year-old girl. Jeans, a printed sweatshirt, and hair dyed an unusual shade of purple. But her eyes, dark brown like Winston's, looked at me with genuine concern. "How did you get here?" I asked. "Does your mom know you're here?" "Bus," she shrugged. "And no, my mom doesn't know. She wouldn't let me. She'd say I just bother you and that she needed help with the twins." Typical Darlene using the kids as an excuse. "Well, I'm glad you're here," I said sincerely. "Tell me about yourself. How's school? Your mom said you were going on a field trip to Washington?" Sage nodded, but something changed in her expression. "Yes, next month, but I'm not sure I'm going. I don't have the money." "But I transferred the money for the trip," I frowned. $350, that's exactly what your mom asked for." Sage looked embarrassed. "Really? That's strange. Mom said we couldn't afford it because of Dad's unemployment." I felt something tighten inside me. So Darlene had used Sage's field trip as an excuse to get money from me. What had she spent it on? New shoes? Dining out with her friends? Another useless knick-knack for the house? "There must have been some misunderstanding," I said, not wanting to turn my granddaughter against her mother. "I'll be sure to check with your mom. You should go on this trip. It's important for your education." Sage nodded, but without much enthusiasm. "Yeah, I guess. I'd rather go to summer science camp, though. They have a biology program, and I want to be a veterinarian." A veterinarian? I smiled. That's wonderful. Your grandfather would be so proud. He always loved animals. I know, she smiled back. I remember when he took me to the animal shelter where you volunteered. I really enjoyed helping with the kittens. We talked for almost an hour. Sage talked about school, her friends, and her new biology teacher who had inspired her to choose her future profession. I listened, enjoying this simple human interaction, which I had been missing so much in recent days. Before leaving, Sage suddenly became serious. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course, dear. I leaned forward. Anything. She hesitated. Have you thought about changing your will? The question caught me off guard. My will? Why would you think that? Sage looked embarrassed. It's just, I heard Mom talking to Uncle Felton on the phone. They were talking about your house, your savings, about securing the inheritance, whatever that means. And then they mentioned a lawyer. I felt a chill run down my spine. My children are discussing my inheritance while I'm lying in the hospital after a stroke? Planning how to divide my things, my house, my savings, without even waiting for me to die? Are you sure you heard them correctly? I asked, hoping it was some kind of misunderstanding. I think so, Sage frowned. Mom seemed very upset. She said something like, we need to act quickly before she changes her mind, or before it's too late. I'm sorry, Grandma, I didn't mean to upset you. You didn't upset me, dear. I took her hand. Thank you for telling me. Sometimes adults behave not very nicely. After Sage left, I lay there for a long time staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what I had heard. My children, who couldn't find the time to visit me in the hospital, somehow found the time to discuss my inheritance and are planning to send a notary, without waiting for me to die, without asking my opinion, as if I were no longer a person but just a bag of assets that needed to be distributed properly. Edna Jenkins, who had been dozing during Sage's visit, now looked at me with sympathy. Problems with the kids? She asked. You could say that, I sighed. It seems they're more interested in my inheritance than my health. Edna chuckled. Typical. My middle daughter is the same. She's always asking if I want to change my will in her favor because, you see, she's the only one who really cares about me. And she doesn't even remember what pills I take for my blood pressure. And what do you do? I asked with genuine interest. I tell them I'm leaving everything to my cat. Edna laughed hoarsely. I don't even have a cat, but you should have seen her face. I smiled, imagining the scene. Maybe there was something to it. Maybe sometimes people need to be reminded that their love and care shouldn't be conditional on material gain. In the evening, after dinner, when I was about to go to bed, there was a knock at the door. I expected to see the nurse with my evening medication, but instead, a middle-aged man in a formal suit with a leather briefcase in his hand appeared at the door. Mrs. Lamont? He asked, entering the room. My name is Ezra Parkhurst. I am a notary public. Your children have asked me to visit you to discuss some important documents. So that's how it is. My children, who were too busy to visit me, found time to arrange a visit from a notary public, without asking me, without asking for my opinion. They just decided it was time to secure the inheritance. Mr. Parkhurst. I sat up straight in bed, trying to look more composed than I felt. What a surprise. Mr. Parkhurst looked at least as uncomfortable as I felt. He shifted from one foot to the other at the door, clearly unsure of where to stand in the hospital room. Perhaps now isn't the best time? He asked, glancing at the IV and medical equipment. I can come back when you're feeling better. No, it's fine, I said, pointing to a chair next to the bed. Since you've come all this way, let's talk. I'm just not sure what documents you're referring to. Mr. Parkhurst sat down, carefully placing his briefcase on his lap. He was a thin man in his 50s with receding hair and thin-rimmed glasses. He looked like a typical TV lawyer, pedantic, a little nervous, with impeccable manners. You see, Mrs. Lamont, your children contacted me yesterday, he began, avoiding my gaze. They expressed concern about your condition and suggested, take some precautions regarding your property. Precautions? I raised an eyebrow. What kind? Well, at your age and considering recent events, he faltered, clearly uncomfortable. They thought it would be wise to discuss the possibility of drawing up a will, or, if you already have one, perhaps revising it in light of the changed circumstances. I felt a wave of indignation rising inside me, but I tried to keep my expression calm. I see. And my children, who for some reason couldn't find the time to visit me in the hospital, thought it necessary to send a lawyer to discuss my imminent death. Mr. Parkhurst flinched and adjusted his glasses. I wouldn't put it that way, Mrs. Lamont. It's more a matter of planning, about making sure everything is in order if I die from this stroke, I finished for him. The doctors say the prognosis is favorable, Mr. Parkhurst. I will most likely live for many more years, much to the disappointment of my children. The notary looked utterly miserable. I'm sure your children didn't mean anything like that, Mrs. Lamont. They're just being thoughtful. You see, I recommend that my clients take care of these things in advance to avoid problems in the future. I softened, seeing his genuine embarrassment. After all, he was just a middleman doing his job. Well, all right, I said, leaning back against the pillows. Let's discuss this. What specific documents did you bring? Mr. Parkhurst opened his briefcase with relief and took out several folders. I have several sample wills that we can use as a basis, as well as a draft that we have discussed with your children. You discussed my will with my children? I couldn't hide my surprise. Without me? It was just a preliminary conversation, the notary hastened to assure me, to understand their expectations and preferences. Of course, the final decision is yours alone. Of course, I repeated, feeling bitter. And what are their expectations? Mr. Parkhurst took out a sheet of paper and cleared his throat. Well, in general terms, your eldest son, Felton, has expressed an interest in your house on Oak Street. He plans to use it as an investment, perhaps rent it out or sell it later. The house where I've lived for almost 50 years, where I raised my children, where Winston died. Felton wants to turn it into a source of income without even waiting for me to die. Go on, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Your daughter, Darlene, is interested in your savings and investments. She mentioned the children's education as a priority, especially college for the eldest daughter, Sage. Sage, who dreams of science camp and veterinary school, but couldn't even get the $350 for a school trip, even though I transferred the money to Darlene. And Lloyd, I asked, what does my youngest son want? Mr. Lloyd was interested in your late husband's collection of antique clocks, the notary replied, checking his records. He mentioned that some of them might be quite valuable, especially the 18th century grandfather clocks, Winston's clock collection, his pride and joy. He spent every weekend caring for them, winding them up, polishing the cases. He dreamed of one day passing the collection on to a grandson who would share his passion. But Lloyd saw only money in them, money that could be quickly obtained by selling the clocks to an antique dealer. I see, I said after a long pause. My children have thought this through carefully. Mr. Parkhurst clearly sensed my mood and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. These are only suggestions, Mrs. Lamont. The final decision is yours. If you have any other wishes— Actually, I do have one request, I interrupted him. I would like you to give me some time to think about it. This is a serious decision, and I don't want to rush into it. Of course, he said, closing the folder with relief. I can come back tomorrow or any other day that is convenient for you. Tomorrow would be fine, I replied, around the same time. After Mr. Parkhurst left, I sat for a long time looking out the window at the hospital parking lot. Cars came and went. People entered and exited the building, some with flowers and balloons for their loved ones, others with haggard faces after long hours at a sickbed. All these people had made time for their families, all except my children. Edna Jenkins, who had tactfully pretended to read a magazine during the notary's visit, now looked at me over her glasses. "The will, is it?" she asked bluntly. "Kids don't waste time." "Apparently not," I replied with a bitter laugh. "They've already divided my belongings among themselves. The house, my savings, my husband's watch collection, everything except me. It seems they've already written me off." "Children," Edna shook her head. "You raise them, sacrifice everything for them, and then they treat you like an inconvenient piece of furniture that can't be thrown away, but that you don't want to keep in your house." "Not all children are like that." I recalled the sincere concern in Sage's eyes. My granddaughter found time to visit me. Grandchildren are different, Edna agreed. They're not yet spoiled by greed and selfishness. But just wait until they grow up. They'll be just like their parents. I wasn't so sure about that. Sage had always seemed different, more sensitive, more attentive than her mother. Maybe some qualities just skip a generation. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the semi-darkness of the hospital room, listening to Edna's quiet snoring and the steady hum of the medical equipment, and thought about my life, about the decisions that had brought me here, alone, forgotten by my own children, with a notary instead of visitors. Maybe I spoiled them too much? Maybe I should have been stricter, more demanding. Or, on the contrary, was I not attentive enough to their emotional needs, too focused on the practical aspects of parenting? Winston always said that we were setting a dangerous precedent by giving our children money every time they asked for it. One day they'll be waiting not just for money, but for the entire inheritance, he warned. But I always defended them. They're just going through a difficult period, I said. They need our help now, and then they'll be on their own. But they never were. Even Felton, with all his success, still saw his parents' house as an asset to be monetized. Darlene was still asking for money for the kids, even though her husband should have been supporting the family long ago. Lloyd was always Lloyd. I spent a sleepless night remembering moments from the past that now seemed different. How Felton insisted on an expensive college, even though Winston and I offered to pay for a local university. How Darlene demanded a lavish wedding that cost almost all of our savings at the time. How Lloyd borrowed more and more money and never paid back a penny. In the morning, I felt physically exhausted but surprisingly clear-headed. For the first time in a long time, I saw the situation for what it was, without the rose-colored glasses of maternal love. After breakfast, Vanessa arrived with my morning medication. "How are we feeling today?" she asked, checking her readings. "Physically, not great, but mentally, surprisingly good," I replied honestly. Vanessa smiled. "That's a good sign. Dr. Reeves says your readings are improving. If things continue like this, you may be discharged early next week." "And then what?" I asked, more to myself than to her. "Go back to an empty house? Sit around and wait for the kids to deign to call and ask for money?" Vanessa sat down on the edge of the bed, her face serious. "Mrs. Lamont, I shouldn't interfere in my patients' family affairs, but I've seen too many elderly people who become ATMs for their children. It never ends well." "I know," I sighed. "It's just hard to change lifelong habits. But sometimes it's necessary," she said, squeezing my hand gently, "for your own well-being." After she left, I thought about her words for a long time. Maybe it was time to change my habits? Maybe the best way to help my children was to stop indulging their greed. Sage came by again after school that afternoon. This time she brought a small bouquet of wildflowers, which she had apparently picked in the park on her way to the hospital. "These are for you, Grandma," she said, placing the flowers in a plastic cup filled with water, "to cheer you up." "Thank you, dear," I said, genuinely touched. "You're the only one who brought me flowers." "Really?" Sage frowned. "Didn't Mom come by? She said she was going to." "No." I decided not to beat around the bush. "Neither your mom nor your uncles found the time to visit me, but they did find the time to send a notary to discuss my will." Sage looked shocked. "What? They really did that? God, that's quite indecent," I suggested. I wanted to say disgusting, but yes, indecent works too. She sat down next to me, her face expressing sincere outrage. "Grandma, this is just awful. You just had a stroke and they're thinking about your money. And your grandfather's house and his watch," I added with a sad smile. "They've already divided everything up among themselves." "I can't believe it." Sage shook her head. "Although no, I can. Mom talks about money all the time, about how we can't afford this or that, even though she just bought a new car. And then she asks you for money for my field trip and spends it on something else. So Darlene really did use the money for something else." I felt a pang of disappointment, though to be honest, I wasn't surprised. "What are you going to do?" Sage asked. "With the will, I mean." I thought about it. What did I really want to do? Divide my property among children who only see me as a source of money? Leave everything to Sage and her brother and sister, knowing that their parents would probably find a way to get their hands on the money? Or maybe there was another way. I haven't decided yet, I replied honestly. The notary is coming tonight and I need to give him some kind of answer. Whatever you decide, Grandma, Sage said, squeezing my hand, I'll support you, even if you decide to leave it all to the cat shelter. That phrase made me smile unexpectedly. Charity. Winston and I had always supported the High Point Medical Center, where he had been treated during his final illness, and the Senior Support Fund, which helped lonely elderly people in our town. Winston always said that money should go to those who really need it, not to those who just want more. After Sage left, I shared my thoughts with Edna. That's not a bad idea, she agreed. Let your children know that they're not the only ones who are entitled to your money. Maybe it will teach them to appreciate what they have. I'm not sure it's worth depriving them of their inheritance entirely, I hesitated. They're still my children, no matter what. Well, leave them something symbolic, Edna suggested. Enough so they can't say you cheated them, but not enough so they can celebrate their victory. And let the bulk of it go to a good cause. There was logic in her words, fair, but not cruel. By evening, I had made my decision. When Mr. Parkhurst appeared at the door of the ward at the appointed time, I already knew what I was going to say. "Good evening, Mrs. Lamont," he greeted me. "You look better. I hope you're feeling well." "Thank you, Mr. Parkhurst," I replied. "Physically, I'm on the mend, but mentally, I feel better than I ever have." He nodded, not quite understanding where I was going with this, and took yesterday's papers out of his briefcase. "I brought the draft we discussed yesterday. If you're ready to discuss the details—" "I'm afraid we won't need those papers," I interrupted. "I have other plans for my estate." Mr. Parkhurst looked surprised. "Oh, what have you decided?" "I want to make a new will," I said firmly, "in which the bulk of my estate, my house, and most of my savings will go to the High Point Medical Center and our town's Senior Citizens Fund." The notary blinked several times, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Are you sure, Mrs. Lamont? What about your children?" "I'm leaving something for my children, too," I replied. $10,000 each. That's enough to help them in case of real need, but not enough to encourage greed. As for Winston's watch collection, I paused. I want this to remain between us, but I'm leaving it to Sage. She's the only one who truly appreciated those watches for their history, not their value. Winston would have been happy to know that his collection would remain in the family, with someone who would take care of it. Mr. Parkhurst looked uncertain. "Don't get me wrong, Mrs. Lamont, charity is wonderful, but such a radical change. Your children might be upset." "Perhaps," I nodded, "but I think it's the right decision. My children need to understand that my worth is not measured by my possessions, that I am not an ATM they can use at their discretion. Perhaps this lesson will cause them to rethink their priorities." The notary paused for a moment, apparently considering my words. "Well, that's your right," he said finally. "I'll prepare the necessary documents, but I must warn you that your children may contest the will after your death, especially given your current state of health." "Let them try," I smiled. "By then, I hope they'll have learned their lesson. And if they don't, well, then I really have failed as a mother." Mr. Parkhurst nodded, making notes. "I'll prepare a draft of the will and bring it back tomorrow for you to sign. You'll need witnesses, but I can bring my assistant and someone from the hospital staff can serve as the second witness." "Thank you, Mr. Parkhurst." I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. "And please don't tell my children about the new will. I want to tell them myself when the time comes." "Of course, this is confidential information," he assured me. "I won't say a word to anyone." After he left, Edna looked at me with obvious approval. "Now that's what I call sense," she said. "A reasonable compromise. The children will get a little, but not too much. And maybe they'll realize that money isn't the most important thing in life." "I hope so," I replied. "Although, to be honest, I'm not sure they'll learn the right lesson from it. But at least I'll know I did what I think is right." "How do you think they'll react when they find out?" Edna asked with interest. "I think they'll be shocked," I said, unable to suppress a slight smile as I imagined their faces. "Maybe outraged. They'll probably try to talk me out of it. But I won't change my mind. It's time they understood that I'm not just a source of money. I'm their mother, a person who deserves respect and care, regardless of what I can give them. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in a long time. Mr. Parkhurst, for all his virtues, proved to be the weak link. Less than a day after I signed the new will, the phone was ringing off the hook. Felton, Darlene, Lloyd, one after another, as if on cue. I didn't answer. Let them suffer in uncertainty a little longer. After all, they hadn't been in a hurry to visit me for almost a week. Now it was my turn to make them wait. Edna watched the flashing screen of my phone with undisguised pleasure. I bet Mr. Parkhurst didn't survive the first question, she chuckled. Those lawyers always crack under pressure. Mark my words, by dinner time you'll have a full set of kids, with flowers and chocolates. She was right, though not entirely. The first to arrive, around 11 in the morning, was Felton. No flowers, but in an immaculate dark blue suit, as if he were going to a business meeting rather than visiting his mother in the hospital. He was carrying a leather briefcase very similar to the one Mr. Parkhurst had. "Mom," he leaned down and touched my cheek with his lips. "How are you feeling? You look much better than I expected." For a dying old woman who hasn't had a single visitor in a week? I didn't bother to hide my sarcasm. "Yes, I suppose I look all right." Felton grimaced and squared his shoulders, a gesture he always made before a difficult conversation. "I was at a conference, Mom," I explained, "but I called every day to ask about you." "The nurses, not me," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You know, the phone works both ways. You could have called me." He lowered his gaze, the first sign that he was uncomfortable. "I didn't want to disturb you. The doctors said you needed rest." "How thoughtful." I nodded toward the chair by the bed. "Sit down, Felton. I assume you're not here just to inquire about my health." He sat down, placing his briefcase on his knees, and was silent for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Finally, he made up his mind, unzipped his briefcase, and took out several sheets of paper. "Mr. Parkhurst told me about your decision," he began, trying to sound calm. "Mom, I understand you're upset that we haven't visited you often enough, but rewriting your will in your condition, giving everything to charity, is an impulsive decision. I brought some information about the legal aspects of wills made during illness. I'm afraid such a will could be contested." There he was, the Felton I knew, always with facts, figures, and paragraphs of law, always ready to explain why his way was the most rational. "Contested by whom?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "By us, your legal heirs," he said quietly but firmly. "Mom, we don't want that. We want everything to be settled peacefully, as a family. But you must understand that such drastic changes to a will, especially after a stroke, could be interpreted as the result of temporary mental confusion." "Temporary mental confusion." I repeated his words, feeling anger rising inside me. "You know what was temporary insanity? Allowing the three of you to manipulate me for decades, believing that you loved me and not my money. Mom, that's not fair." Felton straightened up, his voice becoming more tense. "We've always taken care of you." "So much that you sent a lawyer instead of visiting me in the hospital." I wasn't going to hold back. "So much that you've already divided my things among yourselves while I'm still alive. What wonderful care, Felton. Just exemplary." He opened his mouth to protest, but at that moment the door flew open and Darlene rushed into the room. Unlike Felton, she spared neither flowers nor tears. "Mom!" She threw herself at me with a huge bouquet of roses. "I was so worried. How are you? Are you feeling better? God, you look so pale." She hugged me so tightly that I could smell her perfume, the same one I had given her last Christmas. Expensive perfume she would never have bought for herself. "I'm fine, Darlene," I said, gently pushing her away. "Amazing, isn't it? Especially considering you didn't find time to visit me once all week." "Oh, Mom." Her eyes filled with tears, a talent she had perfected since childhood. "I wanted to, I really did. But the kids. Madison was sick, then Tyler had problems at school, and Sage. Well, you know Sage. She's at that age." "Sage came to see me twice," I interrupted her. A 15-year-old girl found time to take the bus to the hospital after school, and her mother didn't. Darlene froze, her face a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Sage was here? She didn't tell me. Maybe because you're not particularly interested in what she does, or because you take money from me for her field trip and spend it on something else. Darlene's face changed from feigned concern to poorly concealed irritation. Mr. Parkhurst said you rewrote your will, she said, dropping the previous topic. What does that mean, Mom? Are you really going to give everything to charity? Not everything, I said, looking at Felton, who was silently watching our conversation. I'm leaving $10,000 to each of you. The rest will indeed go to the medical center and the elderly support fund. 10,000? Darlene looked as if I had slapped her. Mom, that's nothing. That won't even pay for one semester of college for Sage. Are you worried about Sage's college education? I raised an eyebrow. Then maybe you should have spent that $350 on her field trip instead of whatever that was. Darlene blushed, clearly not expecting me to know about it. It's a misunderstanding, she mumbled. I was going to use that money for the field trip. I just needed it for something else temporarily. Temporarily look richer than you are in front of your friends, I finished for her. Or temporarily buy another pair of shoes that will gather dust in your closet along with a dozen others. Felton cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. Mom, let's not get personal. We're talking about a significant amount of money that you and your father earned together and that should stay in the family. Charity is wonderful, but what, Felton? I turned my gaze to him. But I have to think about the family? The same family that sends a lawyer instead of visiting me? The same family that has already divided my belongings among themselves while I'm still alive? At that moment, the door opened again and Lloyd entered the room. Unlike Felton and Darlene, he made no attempt to pretend he had come out of concern. His face expressed pure annoyance. What the hell, Mom? He didn't even say hello. 10,000? Are you serious? After everything we've been through? After everything you've been through? What? I looked at my younger son, standing in front of me in a worn leather jacket with 3 days' stubble and the smell of cigarettes. After everything you've done for me? What is this, Lloyd? He fell silent, clearly unprepared for such directness. We're your children, he finally said, as if that explained everything. You can't just do what I want with my money, I finished for him. Why not? Because you've already counted that money? Because Felton needs a house as an investment, Darlene needs savings for Sage College, and you need your dad's watch so you can sell it right away? There was silence. My children looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Finally, Darlene resorted to her favorite tactic. Tears. Mom, we're just worried about you, she said, pulling a handkerchief out of her purse. We don't want you to make a mistake you'll regret. A mistake? I felt something boiling inside me. You want to know what mistakes I've made, Darlene? I made a mistake every time I gave you the money you asked for. I made a mistake when I turned a blind eye to the fact that your husband hasn't been able to find a stable job for 8 years, and you continue to live as if you have an unlimited budget. I made a mistake when... What did you expect? Darlene snapped suddenly, her face red with anger. That I would live like you? In the same dress for years? In a house that hasn't changed since the 70s? That's your choice, but I don't want that life. But you want my money, I said, looking at her without anger, only sadness. The money I earned by living in that same dress for years and not changing the furniture since the 70s. Felton tried to diffuse the situation, always acting as a peacemaker. Mom, Darlene didn't mean it that way. We're all very grateful for your support over the years. But you have to understand that such a drastic change in your will looks like an impulsive decision made in a moment of hurt. Maybe we really should have visited you more often. We're at fault and we admit it. But disinheriting us is too harsh a punishment. Punishment? I shook my head. Do you really think I'm doing this to punish you? Felton, you earn more than I ever did. You have your own house, your own car, your own life. Why do you need my old house on Oak Street? It's the family home, he began, but I cut him off. The family home you want to sell or rent out. Don't kid me, Felton. I talked to Mr. Parkhurst, remember? Lloyd, who had been listening silently, suddenly slammed his fist on the bedside table. To hell with it all, he exclaimed. Let's call a spade a spade. Mom, you're angry that we didn't rush to the hospital the second you called. Okay, maybe we're not perfect children, but to take everything away from us? To give money to charity when I'm up to my ears in debt? That's cruel, even for you. Debt? I looked at him. What debt, Lloyd? The one you ran up playing poker with your friends? Or the ones you got buying parts for the motorcycle you never finished? Or maybe the ones you owe your ex for child support, which you haven't paid in 3 years. Lloyd's face contorted with anger. You've always been like this, he hissed. You always thought I was a loser, unlike Golden Boy Felton, who always did everything right. Don't drag me into this, Felton snapped. I never asked for special treatment. No? Lloyd turned to his brother. Who got the money for college? Who got the first car as a gift? Who was always Mom's favorite? Stop it, Darlene intervened. You're the one with the problems, Lloyd, always looking for someone else to blame instead of taking responsibility for your life. Oh, don't give me a lecture about responsibility, Lloyd pointed at her. You're the one who's always begging Mom for money because your husband can't hold down a job for more than 6 months. Don't you dare talk about Brandon. Darlene jumped up, her eyes flashing. At least I have a family, children, not a string of one-night stands with waitresses. Enough. Felton's voice sounded tired. We didn't come here to fight with each other. Mom, he turned to me, we're asking you to reconsider your decision. Not in the heat of the moment, not now. Just think about it again when you get home, when you're feeling better. I looked at them, at my children, who in 5 minutes had gone from feigned concern to mutual recriminations. They didn't even notice how it looked from the outside. 3 adults arguing over money at their sick mother's bedside. At that moment, I felt not anger, but a deep, piercing sadness. What had I done wrong? Where had I gone wrong in raising them? Or maybe it wasn't me, but the world that taught them to value things more than relationships. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my left temple. Everything swam before my eyes, and sounds became muffled, as if through cotton wool. I heard Edna's alarmed voice. Nurse, hurry! The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the frightened faces of my children and the determined footsteps of Vanessa, who ran into the ward and began giving orders. Everyone out now! Her voice sounded like an order. Now! I woke up when it was already dark. The first thing I saw was Vanessa's worried face as she checked the monitor readings. Welcome back, Mrs. Lamont. She smiled when she saw that I had opened my eyes. You scared us. What happened? My voice sounded hoarse. A spike in blood pressure, she replied. Almost 200. We gave you medication and everything is normal now, but you need rest, no excitement. My children. I sent them away, she said with professional firmness. They almost gave you a second stroke with their arguing. That's unacceptable. Are they gone? For some reason, I felt sad, even though just a moment ago I would have been glad to get rid of them. Not quite, Vanessa said, adjusting my pillow. Your daughter is in the hallway waiting for permission to come in. Your sons have left, but they promised to come back tomorrow. I sighed. Of course they would come back. They would keep coming back until they convinced me to change my will. I don't want to see anyone today, I said wearily. Not even Darlene. Especially not Darlene. I'll tell her, Vanessa nodded. But your granddaughter, Sage, is also there. She arrived an hour ago and is very upset. May I let her in? Sage. I felt my lips form a smile. Yes, of course. Send her in. Sage entered quietly, almost on tiptoe, as if afraid of disturbing me. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. Grandma, she said, coming to the bed and gently taking my hand. Are you okay? Mom said you had a seizure. Nothing serious, sweetie. I squeezed her hand. Just a little high blood pressure. It happens at my age. It's because of them, isn't it? Her voice trembled. Because they were fighting over money? Mom told me about the will. She's very upset. I think they're all upset, I sighed. But it's my decision, Sage. My money, my choice. She nodded, looking at me with an expression that was too serious for a 15-year-old girl. I understand, Grandma, and I want you to know that I don't care whether you leave me anything or not. I just want you to be healthy. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Amidst all the greed and selfishness, she was the only ray of sincerity. "Thank you, sweetheart," I stroked her hand. "You're just like your grandfather. He would have been proud of you." After Sage left, Edna, who had been watching everything from her bed, came over to me. "Your granddaughter is a real treasure," she said. "Not like her mother. What are you going to do now, Maggie? They won't leave you alone, you know that." "I know," I said, looking out the window at the city lights. "But I won't change my mind. Maybe it's cruel. Maybe it won't even help them. But it's the right thing to do." "You're not cruel," said Vanessa, who had returned with the evening medication. "You've just stopped being a doormat." She sat down on the edge of the bed, handing me the pill cup. "You know, Mrs. Lamont, I had a similar situation with my brother. For years, I gave him money, paid his bills, got him out of trouble. And every time he promised it was the last time that he would change. But nothing changed until I said no. It was the hardest word I ever said in my life." "What happened then?" I asked, taking the pills. "At first, he was furious. He called me heartless, selfish, every name he could think of." Vanessa smiled sadly. "Then, when he realized I wasn't going to change my mind, he disappeared for 6 months. And when he came back, he was a different person. He found a job and quit drinking. Now he has his own auto repair shop and 2 children. He thanks me for saying no, even though at the time he was ready to hate me." "Not all stories end so well," Edna remarked. "That's true," Vanessa nodded. "But it's not about the end result. It's about doing what's right for you. Sometimes the best thing we can do for those we love is to stop indulging their weaknesses." I lay awake for a long time after Vanessa left, thinking about her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe my no wasn't an act of revenge, but an act of love. A strange, difficult love, but love nonetheless. I didn't know if my decision would change my children. Maybe they would just hold a grudge and never forgive me. Maybe they would come and smile and pretend to care while I was alive, hoping I would change my mind. Or maybe, by some miracle, they will understand what I was trying to tell them, that their value to me is not measured by the money I leave them, but by the care they show me while I am alive. In any case, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing the right thing. Not as a perfect mother, not as a saint ready to forgive everything and give everything away, but as a person who had finally learned to respect herself. For the next 3 days, my children turned into model heirs straight out of a family psychology textbook. Felton came by in the mornings before work, always with coffee from Starbucks and a fresh newspaper. Darlene showed up in the afternoon with homemade food in plastic containers, casseroles, soups, and rolls that she said she had made especially for me. Lloyd stopped by in the evenings, usually with small gifts, flowers, chocolate, or magazines. All 3 diligently avoided the subject of the will, as if it didn't exist. "They're like clockwork," Edna remarked, watching the carousel. "Did they make a schedule? Or are they just trying not to run into each other after last time?" "More like the latter," I replied, examining another casserole from Darlene. "They've never been able to work together." Vanessa, who had just come in with the afternoon medications, shook her head. "Your daughter has been bringing food for 4 days in a row. The first time I thought, how sweet. But yesterday I overheard her talking on the phone in the hallway. Something about how she was making progress, and Mum was melting away with worry." "I'm not surprised," I shrugged. "Darlene was always the best actress of my children. She was in the drama club at school." "And you're not angry?" Vanessa asked, surprised. "Not anymore." I shook my head. "Anger takes too much energy. I need to save my strength for recovery." Dr. Reeves was pleased with my progress. My blood pressure stabilized, my speech returned completely, and the weakness in my left arm gradually disappeared thanks to the exercises Deborah showed me. On the 10th day after the stroke, he announced that I could go home, provided, of course, that I made regular visits to the doctor and continued my rehabilitation. "Someone will have to look after you at first," he reminded me. "At least a week or 2. Do you have someone who can do that?" Before I could answer, Darlene, who was in the room, jumped up from her chair. "Of course, doctor. I'll take care of Mom. She can move in with us. We have a spare room." "No, thank you," I replied faster than I could think. "I prefer to stay in my own home, but Darlene can come visit me if she wants." "But Mom," Darlene feigned concern. "You can't stay alone. You just had a stroke." "I can hire a nurse for the first few weeks," I said calmly. "I have enough savings for that." At the mention of savings, Darlene's eyes narrowed slightly. Dr. Reeves, unaware of the tension between us, nodded. "That's a wise decision. It's important that you feel comfortable during your recovery." When the doctor left, Darlene turned to me with a hurt look on her face. "Don't you trust me, Mom? Do you think I can't take care of you?" "It's not about trust, Darlene, I said, looking her in the eyes. "It's about the fact that you have 3 children and a husband who need your attention. I need peace and quiet and the chance to recover at my own pace. It's all because of the will, isn't it?" She couldn't hold back any longer. "Are you still angry with us?" "I'm not angry," I replied, surprised at my own calmness. "I just see things as they are, and I prefer to live my life rather than be a burden to my children." "You've never been a burden," Darlene exclaimed, but her voice sounded false even to her. "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "Then why couldn't you find time to visit me for 3 days after my stroke? Why did you and your brothers send a lawyer instead?" Darlene opened her mouth to argue, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she sighed. "Mom, we all make mistakes, but that doesn't mean we don't love you." "I know you love me, Darlene," I smiled gently. "In your own way, but that doesn't change my decision about the will." Her face twisted in annoyance for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "That's not what we're talking about right now," she said, pretending she didn't care about the subject. "The important thing is that you get well. Everything else doesn't matter." But I could see in her eyes that it mattered very much to her. On the day I was discharged, all 3 of them were there to meet me: Felton, Darlene, and Lloyd. They helped me pack my things, listened to Dr. Reeves and the nurse's recommendations, and filled out the necessary paperwork. From the outside, we looked like the perfect, caring family. "Take care of yourself, Maggie." Edna hugged me goodbye. "And don't fall for their tricks. You're stronger than you think." "Thank you for everything, Edna." I smiled sincerely. "Maybe we'll meet in town sometime when you're discharged." "Sure," she nodded. "I still have a cat, remember? I left everything to him. I want to introduce you to him." We both laughed, much to the confusion of my children, who didn't understand our joke. Vanessa also came over to say goodbye. "Good luck, Mrs. Lamont." She squeezed my hand. "Remember what we said. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one." My house on Oak Street greeted me with silence and a faint smell of dust. Felton immediately started opening windows, Darlene rushed to the kitchen to make tea, and Lloyd began arranging my things. "I hired a nurse recommended by Dr. Reeves," I said, settling into my favorite chair. "She'll be here tomorrow morning. You don't need to stay the night." "But Mom, the first day home is the most important," Darlene objected. "I can stay, really." "Thank you, but I'll be fine," I insisted. "I need to get used to being on my own again." After some discussion, they finally agreed to leave, but promised to return tomorrow. When the door closed behind them, I was finally able to breathe. Despite the dust and mustiness, the house felt like a refuge after the hustle and bustle of the hospital. I slowly walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects as if greeting them after a long absence. Everything was in its place: books on the shelves, photographs on the walls, Winston's clock collection in glass display cases. These clocks had always been the heart of the house. Their steady ticking gave the impression that time was passing normally, despite all the upheavals. I especially loved the 18th century grandfather clock that Winston had bought at an auction in 1980. It stood in the living room, majestic and austere, with a polished brass pendulum. Winston spent hours tinkering with its mechanism, adjusting every detail to perfection. He especially wanted to pass this clock on to his grandchildren, to someone who would appreciate not only its value, but also its beauty, history, and craftsmanship. I remembered how little Sage, who was only 5 at the time, sat next to her grandfather, watching him clean the mechanism of the pocket watch. She asked endless questions: why the wheels turned that way, how the watch knew the time, why it needed to be wound. Winston patiently answered, explaining complex things in simple words. "This little girl has a real interest, Maggie," he said to me later. Not like her mother, who always looked at her watch just to see how much time was left before the end of the lesson. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange rhythm. During the day, my caregiver, Mrs. Hawthorne, an energetic woman in her 60s, came to help me with my exercises, make sure I took my medication, and prepare light meals. In the evenings, one of the children would always show up, sometimes all three, but more often one at a time, as if on an unspoken schedule. They continued to play the role of caring children, asking how I was feeling, bringing me food, helping with the housework. But I noticed the way they looked at things in the house. Felton appraised the walls and ceilings, as if estimating the cost of repairs before selling. Darlene lingered over the silverware I had inherited from my mother. Lloyd stood for a long time in front of the display cases with watches, especially those that could fetch the highest price. They studiously avoided the subject of the will, but sometimes they couldn't resist making transparent hints. "I saw a lovely retirement home on the outskirts of town," Darlene said one day, leafing through a magazine. "Very comfortable, with medical care. Maybe we should think about moving there. This house is too big for one person." "Thank you for your concern, Darlene, but I prefer to stay here," I replied calmly. "As long as I can take care of myself, I don't need a retirement home. But Mom, it's so much work, cleaning, cooking, gardening." She wouldn't give up. "But everything is included in the price." "And how much does that cost?" I asked innocently. "Well," she hesitated, "it depends on the program, but with your savings—" "The savings I've decided to give to charity," I clarified. Darlene blushed and quickly changed the subject. Lloyd was less subtle in his attempts. "You know, Mom," he said one evening, looking at a pocket watch in a shop window, "I've been thinking about Dad's collection. It's just sitting there gathering dust. I could, well, take care of it. Clean the mechanisms, restore the cases." "Since when have you been interested in watchmaking, Lloyd?" I asked. "I remember when your father offered to teach you, you said it was a boring old man's hobby." "Well, I've grown up since then," he shrugged. "I've come to appreciate things like that." "Their value, you mean?" He didn't have an answer and soon left, citing some urgent business. Felton, as always, was the most rational in his approach. "Mom, I looked into the Senior Citizen Support Fund," he said during one of his visits. "Did you know they had some financial reporting issues last year? An audit revealed some irregularities." "Really?" I didn't believe it for a second. The fund had an impeccable reputation, and Winston had thoroughly checked it out before we started making donations. "Yes, serious issues," Felton nodded with a concerned look. "I think you should reconsider your decision to give them such a large sum. There are many other, more reliable charities. Or I could just leave the money to my children, right?" I smiled, looking him in the eye. He couldn't hold my gaze and looked away. "I'm just concerned that your money isn't being wasted," he muttered. "I appreciate your concern, Felton, but I trust the foundation. And I trust my decision, too. The only person whose visits brought me real joy was Sage. She came almost every day after school, usually when there were no adults around. We drank tea, she told me about her lessons, the books she was reading, her plans for the future. Once I found her standing in front of the clock case, staring spellbound at the mechanism of a pocket watch that Winston had left open so that the gears could be seen. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" I asked, coming up beside her. "Incredible," she nodded without looking up. "Grandpa told me how they work, but I was too young to really understand. Now I'm studying mechanics at school, and it's all starting to make sense. Your grandfather would be so happy to hear that," I said, putting my hand on her shoulder. "You know, Sage, I made some changes to my will that I didn't tell your mom or your uncles about." "What?" She turned to me curiously. "I decided to leave you Dad's watch collection," I said quietly. "Every single one of them. Because you're the only one who truly appreciates them for what they meant to him, not for their value." Sage's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? Grandma, I don't know what to say. I'll take good care of them, I promise. I'll study watchmaking and learn how to repair them, just like Grandpa did." "I know, sweetheart," I smiled, "but this must remain between us. Your mother and uncles think the watches are going to charity, too. Let it be so for now." "I won't tell anyone," she nodded seriously. "But won't they contest the will? Mom talks about it all the time when she thinks I'm not listening." "Let them try," I shrugged, but Mr. Parkhurst assured me that the will is legally sound. And considering that I made them small monetary gifts rather than disinheriting them completely, their chances of contesting it are practically zero. Sage looked thoughtfully at the clock. You know, Grandma, I'm not sure Grandpa would have wanted the clock to cause family quarrels. Your grandfather wanted the watch to go to someone who would appreciate it and take care of it, I replied. And what your mother and uncles think about it, that's their problem. Weeks passed, and gradually my children's visits became less and less frequent. Felton no longer came every morning. At first he started coming every other day, then once a week, and then he limited himself to phone calls on Sundays. Darlene held out for a while, but her enthusiasm gradually faded, especially when she realized that I was not going to change my mind about the will. Lloyd, as usual, was the most inconsistent. He could disappear for weeks and then suddenly show up in the middle of the night, quite drunk, and start talking about how unfair life was. I wasn't surprised or offended. Deep down, I always knew that their sudden concern was just a means to an end, not a genuine feeling. And when it became clear that the goal was unattainable, their concern evaporated like morning fog in the sun. Sage, on the other hand, continued to visit regularly. What's more, she brought her younger brother Tyler with her, who, as it turned out, had inherited his grandfather's interest in mechanics. Together, they began to study watchmaking from Winston's books, and I enjoyed watching their progress. One day, about 3 months after I was discharged from the hospital, Edna Jenkins, my roommate in the hospital ward, came to visit me. She had fully recovered from her surgery and looked energetic and cheerful. "So, how's it going?" she asked without preamble as we settled into the living room with cups of tea. "Are the kids still trying to get their inheritance?" "Not anymore," I shook my head. "They've come to terms with it, or at least they pretend to. Felton hardly ever comes by. Darlene stops in once a week with the usual questions about my health. And Lloyd, well, Lloyd is Lloyd. What about you?" She looked at me intently. "Do you regret your decision?" I thought about it for a moment. Did I regret it? Had there been a moment in the past few months when I wanted to go back to the way things were, being a source of money for my children, an ATM with unlimited withdrawals? No, I replied honestly. I don't regret it. Of course, it's lonely sometimes, but I prefer honest loneliness to false concern. That's right, Edna nodded firmly. How's your granddaughter, the one who visited you in the hospital? Sage comes often. I couldn't help smiling. And her younger brother, too. They're interested in Winston's watch collection, studying the mechanisms, and have even started doing some minor repairs under my guidance. Does their mother know you're leaving the watches to your granddaughter? Edna asked. No, and let's keep it that way for now. I shook my head. There'll be time for that later. When Edna left, I sat in the living room for a long time, listening to the clock ticking and thinking about the past few months. A lot had changed since the day I woke up in the hospital after my stroke. I saw my children as they really were, not perfect, not terrible, just people with their own weaknesses and flaws. People I still loved, no matter what, but I would no longer allow them to manipulate me. I realized that the real legacy is not money, not a house, not a collection of expensive watches. The real legacy is the values we pass on to the next generation. And looking at Sage and Tyler, I saw that at least some of what Winston and I believed in would live on. As for my children, maybe in time they'll understand that I did it not out of revenge, but out of love. A strange, difficult love that requires not indulging weaknesses, but challenging them, forcing them to grow. Or maybe not. Maybe they'll remain resentful, believing I treated them unfairly. That will be their choice too. Either way, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in many years. The peace of a person who is finally living in harmony with themselves and their values. Every morning I wake up, do the exercises Deborah showed me, have breakfast, read a book, or work in the garden. Sometimes I meet up with Edna or other friends I've started to reconnect with. In the evenings, I often sit in the living room listening to the clock ticking and thinking about Winston, about our life together, about the children we raised, about the grandchildren who are just starting out on their journey. And in those moments, I realized that despite all the difficulties, despite the disappointments and losses, life has been good, and it continues to be good, even at 72, even after a stroke, even with children who think more about inheritance than your well-being. Winston used to say, "The clock keeps ticking, Maggie, whether we look at it or not." And he was right. Time passes, life goes on, and every new day is an opportunity to live as you see fit. Even if that means leaving old habits, old roles, old expectations behind, especially if it means leaving them behind.